Look for that low-hanging fruit, right, where you can attack maybe your smaller accounts and get some price improvement there. Focus on those smaller accounts to start with and see what kind of improvement you can get there. And look for that price variation. And you don't need to boil the ocean. Just start getting some improvement. Start small with pricing, get some early wins, and move on from there.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the mysterious relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today, our guest is Ralph Zuponcic. Here are 3 things you want to know about Ralph before we start. He has a patent in his own name. That's pretty impressive. He's from my home state of Ohio. In fact, he played college football at Ohio University, which is not the Ohio State University, but still, it's a great school. And he's the founder and president of PricePoint Partners, and he did that in the last century. Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's going to be fun. How'd you get into pricing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we had actually started a business back in about 1996 where we were doing marketing and marketing research for companies. And lo and behold, we had one of our larger clients that had asked us to do some work that involved pricing, right? And to make a long story short, we kind of dove into that and had to do some quick learning and quick studying, and was able to apply some basic value principles to pricing at that time, and recognized it as an opportunity, right? An industry way back then, right? When there were, just 2 or 3 pricing consultancies maybe in the country. And so got started with this client and spread from there and just kept building out. And you know how pricing has evolved, right, over the years. And today, right, we've got tools and software to help us manage pricing, particularly in those complex environments. So it's evolved tremendously, right, in the last 20 some years. So that's how we got started. And it's been quite a journey.
So it sounds like when you first started, people didn't know that pricing was important. And I have to say, even today, it feels to me like so many companies don't know pricing is important. Would you disagree with that?
No, I would agree with that completely. And way back in the mid to late 90s, it was even worse. The level of education that it took to even have a conversation around pricing was immense. And sometimes would take months and months and months of discussion before people finally understood what strategic pricing really meant. And then to get them comfortable with actually taking some initial steps in their businesses towards strategic pricing was even more difficult. So sales cycles were very, very long. And frankly, a lot of people just didn't get it. And I can tell you early on, it was somewhat discouraging. Today, it's better. And pricing has gotten a lot of press by a lot of different organizations. And it's better and it's easier today, but not as easy as, say, convincing people that they need to improve revenues, for example, or sales. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a challenge early on. Sure.
Yeah. So when I read a little bit about PricePoint Partners, you guys focus mostly on distribution and manufacturing. Is that true?
That is true. That's our world, yes.
Okay, so here's what's first off, I think it's a given. When we think about manufacturing and distribution, we're talking about a physical good, which means there are hard cost of goods sold. Is that true?
That is absolutely true.
Okay, so you fight a battle probably every day that is, you don't want to do cost plus pricing.
Amen to that. Yeah, absolutely. I saw some statistics a number of years ago that something like 67% of all manufacturing companies use cost plus pricing, right? And what leads to that in most cases is lack of any knowledge on how to do it otherwise, right? And it's simple, right? And, we know all the reasons why companies use it, but many times they just don't know a better way. And the fact is, distributors and manufacturers are living in these complex price environments where there's lots of items they're selling, there's lots of customers, there's lots of markets. And even if you just stop right there, that just creates complexity in of itself. And so the easy thing to do is go to cost plus. And that's okay, when it comes to protecting margins, as you know, Mark, but it doesn't help you reach for the optimal price, if you will.
Yeah, I remember my very first sales job. I was an engineer when I first came out of school, and then I transferred into sales engineering. I was selling multi-million-dollar pieces of test equipment. And what I recall is the way we would price is we would just take what's the cost of the hardware and multiply that times 5. And that's our starting point. It was just insane.
Yeah, right? So that's what you do if you're lacking anything else. And the one thing it does is it can help you establish a pricing floor, right? Just by saying, all right, here's our minimum margin that we're not going to sell any lower than this, right? And use that to establish that floor. But all too often, right, companies are using it to establish their final price, and they have no idea, right? So 3 things happen, right, when you use cost plus pricing that are not necessarily good. One is that you now set a price that is higher than the customer is willing to pay, and so you lose the sale. Secondly, you happen to set a price that's much lower than the customer is willing to pay, and so now you've left a lot of money on the table. And thirdly, actually this is obviously a good thing, by a stroke of luck, you happen to arrive at a price that is the maximum the customer is willing to pay. But you and I both know that occurs in a very, very small percentage of those cases.
And it's different for every customer.
Exactly. And you've got to factor those things in. You've got to understand the value at those accounts, right, of that customer and what they value and how they value it.
Yeah, I think cost plus is, well, I guess the reason that I'm talking about cost plus with you is I so often talk to software companies. Software companies have this amazing advantage in that they don't have hard costs, and yet they still find a way to totally mess this up by taking their fixed costs and dividing it by forecasted units and calling that a cost and using that as cost plus. But hardware companies, I at least feel for them in that they know they have to cover their costs when they're selling their product.
Yeah, they do. And, you want to cover those costs. It's the minimal thing that you need to do, obviously, in covering those costs. And you think about it, particularly in manufacturing environments, these manufacturing facilities, there is such a strong focus on costs and controlling costs, right? Most manufacturers believe that the way to get to profitability is simply to reduce cost. So they just don't apply enough attention to the pricing side of it, right? Which you and I know, just a little bit of pricing, even a percentage, can go a long way to improving profitability. That everything in the organization then becomes focused on cost and cost alone. So why not base your pricing on that as well? Is the thinking.
Yeah. And quick aside, I'm sure you've already done this math before, but if I do cost plus pricing, so let's say I find a way to lower my cost by 10%, that means I also lowered my price by 10%, which means I make less margin dollars. Now that's insane, isn't it?
It is. It's the double whammy, isn't it? You're hurting yourself 2 ways. And so, yeah, because everything's based on what you're doing on cost. What they should do at the very least is leave the price where it's at, recalculate the margin with the reduced cost, and take it from there. That's at least moving in the right direction. But that's not what happens, right? If you stick to cost plus, you're going to be basing your price on a lower cost.
Okay, so if we want to get away from cost plus, I want to talk a little bit about distribution because this is just something that fascinates me. Let's take distributor. Distributor's got 100,000 parts that they're stocking or at least having access to. Manufacturers may be changing the prices of products on a regular basis. They've got competitive pressures from other distributors or other distribution channels out there. If they're not doing cost plus, what do they do?
Yeah, good point. So what we see with most distributors is that they leave some of the authority, if you will, to set pricing in the hands of their salespeople. This is very common among distributors. In some cases, salespeople create the selling price completely on their own. And in other cases, they have the ability to discount off a recommended price that may have been based on a cost plus. And so what happens is you've got all these salespeople out there that are kind of doing their own thing because no one has given them direction otherwise, right? Not blaming them, it's just the way it is.
Yep.
And they don't have the visibility to what other salespeople are charging for the identical item in similar selling situations. And so what we do is we take all the data, all the price points that have been charged, if you will, for a given item. We put them on a scatter plot, right? And we see how much variance there is. When you look at that scatter plot, we tend to think of it as market research data because it's telling us what customers are willing to pay. And when we see a lot of customers that are willing to pay $10 per unit, but I've got a handful of customers down here that are paying $6 or $7 per unit, and we're the same type of customer in the same type of market. And what we're talking about here, Mark, is pricing segmentation, segmenting your market. Why shouldn't those $6 and $7 customers be paying more like 9 or 10, like everybody else is? So when we start doing those comparisons and showing salespeople that in fact you're priced 20, 30, 40% lower than your peers, other salespeople are getting those prices, they can see, then have the visibility to that, and they're more willing then to start moving their prices up to that higher level. So what we really do is do price comparison, if you will. We call it price-variance analysis, and it gives salespeople the insight and the confidence, if you will, to move their prices higher.
Yeah, I think price variance analysis makes a ton of sense because what we're looking at is who got the lower prices. Can we figure out why they got the lower prices? Who was willing to pay us more? Can we figure out why they were willing to pay us more? And now we have this uncanny ability to know before the customer negotiates with us how much they'd be willing to pay.
Exactly. Just having more insight to it. It also means spending a little bit more time on pricing from a salesperson standpoint. So they need to understand why this is important to their company, right? They need to understand the leverage effect that price has on profitability. And in ideal situations, Mark, what we like to see happen is that you adjust a salesperson's incentive program to include not only, let's say, top line sales incentives, but in addition to that, make a portion of it price incentives for achieving a target price, or at the very least, improving your price performance from one year to the next. If a salesperson can be measured on their price realization this year, next year's goal may be to get their price realization up maybe 1.5, maybe as much as 2 margin points, okay? And that's all measurable. Pricing can be isolated from a measurement standpoint and communicated to your salespeople. That's the ideal situation to get your salespeople on board from an incentive standpoint.
This sounds awesome. What do you do, or do you have anything to do for companies, distribution channels who don't have direct sales forces into the marketplace? So they're really just, I shouldn't say just, but they're really getting paid for buying, storing, shipping, having inventory for people to be able to buy.
So you're thinking third-party distributors, if you will, right?
Yes.
And so carrying this same sort of strategy and this approach to the distributors can really pay big dividends. And it's a matter of educating them as well, getting in there and showing them, right, how they can price better, doing similar analyses for them or with them, right, getting them to buy into that. Because if they can understand that and they can push for higher and better pricing, that only pays off for the manufacturer as well. So the manufacturer now is having to do less discounting through the distributor to get the business, because the distributor now understands what the acceptable price points will be. So it takes some pressure off the manufacturer and relieves some tension that can exist between manufacturer and distributor as it relates to pricing.
Time out for a quick ad. If you have a subscription business, you have many choices on what you could charge for. You could charge for number of users, number of active users, gigabytes of storage or gigabytes of data transmission, seconds of usage, minutes of usage, hours of usage, months of usage, number of messages, number of downloads, number of clicks, number of views, API calls, events, assessments, miles driven, meals served, hours flown. The list feels endless. How do you decide? Choosing an effective pricing metric is the single most important decision you can make in a subscription business. Get it right, and your company grows as your users get more value. Get it wrong, and it feels like rapid growth is just a fantasy. And here's a hint. For most companies, charging based on the number of users is not the best answer. We just released a new course on pricing metrics. It provides you a step-by-step process on how to brainstorm and then decide on your most effective pricing metrics. To learn more, or better yet, to purchase, go to championsofvalue.com. We hope to see you in the course. Yeah, I remember I was in the semiconductor business for quite a while, and we would sell both direct and we sold through distribution a lot. And selling through distribution is always tricky because we're stepping back and saying to ourselves, what margin does that distributor need in order to carry our products? Now, it wasn't quite as simple as that, but it always felt like there was a number for each distributor. And it's like they're doing cost plus when if I were coaching distribution, I would help them find ways to get away from or at least move away from cost plus pricing.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got this balance that you're trying to work out, right? If you're obviously pricing too high for the distributor, doesn't leave him or enough margin, it disrupts what's going on then in their marketplace with the final user or the final buyer. And so achieving that balance is difficult. If you can have a relationship, maybe not with all distributors, but some key distributors that are tight enough that you can have those discussions openly and honestly, it starts to give you, some better insight, and then you can cooperate, right, with each other to arrive at pricing that's going to be meaningful, both coming from the manufacturer and coming from the distributor. So that's difficult. We have a client right now, oddly enough, who has access to what the distributor is actually charging to their end users. And so they can see the margins, they can calculate the margins, and it's a very unusual situation that we just don't see very often. But in those situations where that information is shared, it does make it a lot easier, right, to manage that. Now, that's not saying that there still isn't some pushback from the distributor. We've seen situations in this case where the distributor will pressure the manufacturer for a discounted price in order to close a certain deal. And then later on, the manufacturer finds out that distributor never passed that discount along to the final customer. They just pocketed the difference. So you've got to be careful in those kind of situations, those negotiations, and understand what the market price really needs to be. So it does get a little bit hairy when you have another channel in there, if you will, like a distributor for sure.
Yeah, and so as a manufacturer, if I'm going to sell through distribution, I want to price it thinking, here's what the end customer is willing to pay. I need to give my distributor 22 points of margin. Here's the price I should charge my distributor. And so essentially I'm calculating backwards. And I don't know for sure what my distributor is going to do, or do they really price it the way I want them to price it? Because we don't control their prices, right? Distributors get to choose their own prices.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. So they can charge whatever they want. Now, we have seen situations, right, where distributors may be a captured distributor, if you will. And there's a couple of companies here in the Cleveland area, the Ohio area, that do that, where one of them is Swagelok, which makes small handheld valves that are used in industry, and they go through distribution. However, these distributors, even though they're independent businesses, are 100% committed to Swagelok, right? So Swagelok then can pretty much dictate what those prices are going to be through that distributor. That's an unusual situation, right? In most cases, distributors representing you and perhaps dozens of other suppliers, and you just don't have that control. They may be even representing competing suppliers in a lot of, which that makes that even more difficult.
Yeah, and whenever I was in that case, which by the way, in semiconductors, every distributor carries many different manufacturers' products, so they carried our competitors. We always had to decide, if I give the distributor more money, they're more likely to push my product than my competitor's product.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a constant tweaking and balancing. And what happens is sales teams, get involved sometimes with these distributors almost on a deal by deal basis. The manufacturers, salespeople do. And so the distributor brings to you perhaps a big potential sale. And so people start sharpening their pencils, right, and cutting prices. And maybe next week there's another one. And so it can be very dynamic in that case, right, depending on the industry that you're in. In other cases, as you mentioned earlier, you may have tens of thousands of items and manufacturers are sending you price increases, every week. And just keeping up and keeping current with that becomes very important. We had one client who was a distributor to convenience stores, and they had thousands of products marked, as you might imagine, candies and snacks and things like that. And they would be getting price increases every week, and they in turn would increase the prices on those items every week. They didn't wait till the end of a quarter or an annual basis to do that. This is a very tight margin business, and they literally increased the prices when they got an increase from their supplier. In other cases, in different industries, different markets, we'll see that being done maybe twice a year, sometimes once a year. Depends on the industry you're in, depends on how tight your margins are.
Yeah. Can we talk just a little bit about data for a second? In semiconductors, we had the lovely advantage that the distributors gave the manufacturers point of sale data, meaning we knew which part they sold to which customer at what volume and what price. Now, that was only for us. It wasn't for our competitors' products, so we didn't get to see all that. But we got our own point of sale data, which proved to be extremely valuable in building relationships or understanding our marketplace. But I'm under the impression most distribution channels don't do that.
You're right, most don't. We've come across, honestly, only one or two over the years in business that do that. And there's certain industries where that is more the norm. In most industries, you're selling your products as a manufacturer to the distributor, and after that, you have no idea where it's going, or much less what the pricing is. And so with that, you've really got to be mindful of what the market pricing is through other ways, right? And perhaps testing the market, or if you're fortunate enough to be selling through distribution and being able to sell direct, right? If you're selling to similar or identical markets, you've got, a direct link, right, to what the marketplace is willing to pay. That can be very helpful. For many manufacturers, they're using this distribution only. And so they're really relying on any feedback they might get from a distributor, which oftentimes can be tainted, right? They have an incentive to communicate lower pricing. So it's unusual that manufacturers have access to what the distributors are charging, unless, of course, the items they're selling are published, right, either online or in a catalog or something like that. Then you can see what the retail pricing is. But even in those cases, right, we find that many distributors will negotiate off what those list prices are, so they become less valuable to the manufacturer. So they might list an item at $20 per unit, but in reality, their average selling price might be $12 or $15.
Do you think the distributors have the data and they just choose not to share it with the manufacturers?
I believe in most cases, particularly medium to large size distributors, they have the data and choose not to, right? In some cases, they may not have the data or all the data, but I think it's their choice, right? What it does then is if they provide that data back to the manufacturer, now the manufacturer clearly sees the margin, right? And in most cases, distributors, most businesses want to protect that. If they don't have to share their margins with a supplier, they'd rather not do it. And so it just doesn't happen very often.
What a great comment. When I was with the semiconductor industry, it was pretty fascinating that it was a common conversation that people would say, well, how do we take more margin out of our distribution channel? And I would keep thinking, why are you doing that? Because if you do that, they're going to go sell our competitors' parts.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, there's this balance, right? I mean, you've got to let the distributor make a reasonable margin, and you've got to decide what reasonable is, right? And it's going to vary for every industry, and you've just got to, understand what's going on in your industry. It'd be great if you knew what every distributor's margin was, but things can get really murky, in terms of visibility to an awful lot when you're using distributors. You certainly don't know what their margins are. You may not even know who their customers are, who they're selling to, unless you're doing a lot of direct shipping, right? Drop shipping to their accounts. You don't know the size of their accounts. It's really blind. And I know in a lot of cases, distribution is the way you have to go. But if I'm a manufacturer and I have the choice between direct and distribution, I know what I would prefer from a pricing standpoint. I'd rather go direct. I have more control.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the other thing I would really like to do if I were a manufacturer in one of these distribution channels is I would negotiate a lower price for them if they would give me the data. So it's like I'm paying them for data.
Yeah, that would be an interesting trade. I think that's a great idea to offer that, right? That we can negotiate and give you a discounted price in trade for certain data. That would be very helpful. And in turn, you also might be able to share with them that giving us certain data may allow us to help you with price analysis and help you get more price, right?
Absolutely. This is a win-win story, right? It's not my distribution channel is a partner of mine. It's not a competitor.
Absolutely. And if you can get them to buy into that, right, then you've created, as you say, that win-win situation. And everybody wins, right? If the distributor can get a little more price, the manufacturer might get a little more price, or know where to get more price. That's the key, and know where not to get more price. And so what it does is, if you can do that, you end up with a distributor that has a lot more confidence about their pricing in the marketplace. And that's what it's all about. The reason we underprice, Mark, is because, right, we don't have the confidence in going to the marketplace with even slightly higher pricing. It's all about being confident in the prices that you're charging. So in turn, we drop our prices and keep them low because that's comfortable for us.
Yeah. Ralph, this has been so much fun. I've really enjoyed this. And I always end with this question. So let me hit you with it. What's one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Sure. So what we see an awful lot is companies that reach out to us that kind of want to boil the ocean on pricing, right? And so they could end up being these enormous undertakings. And my recommendation to them and our listeners would be, look first for an initial step. Find a spot in your organization where you can get a toehold, let's say, on something related to pricing. Look for that low-hanging fruit, right, where you can attack maybe your smaller accounts and get some price improvement there. By the way, there's a lot more margin to be gained by addressing your tiny accounts and your small accounts than most people believe. Everyone's focused on their largest accounts. Don't go there because they're going to negotiate. They have a lot of buying power. Instead, focus on those smaller accounts to start with and see what kind of improvement you can get there. And look for that price variation. And you don't need to boil the ocean. Just start getting some improvement so you can get some buy-in from your organization, get some interest from senior management, if you will, and be able to move from that point. So the point is, start small with pricing, get some early wins, and move on from there.
A, I think that's brilliant. But B, I want to repeat something that you just said, which I thought was really fascinating. And that is, if I'm a manufacturer and I've got power and my buyer has power, that power shift changes if I'm selling to big companies versus small companies.
It really does. It really does. I can't tell you how many clients that we've worked with over the years and helped them get millions of dollars in profit improvement, and we never touched their largest accounts. Okay, we played with the medium-sized to smaller accounts, and it's an absolute gold mine. And so what we find is so many companies are so focused on their big accounts, they're not paying attention to the smaller ones, and there's a lot of money to be made there. And it's low risk compared to dealing with the big accounts.
That is absolute gold. All right. Ralph, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
I think the best thing to do, Mark, is visit our website, PricePointPartners.com, and you'll find our phone number there and email that you can reach out to us if you wish. And other than that, I'll leave a phone number as well. Our number here is 330-342-0923, and you can reach out and call us there if you'd like, and we'll be happy to have a conversation.
I got to ask this, Ralph, does anybody actually make phone calls anymore?
You know what? They do. Occasionally our phone does ring and there's someone on the other end that says, I need help.
All right.
The best thing is go right to our website, PricePointPartners.com, and you'll find a bunch of ways you can contact us there.
Beautiful. Episode 54, all done. Let's see. My favorite part, I think my favorite part, although I enjoyed it all, I have to say was the very end when we were talking about the power of big customers versus small customers. It was just extremely clear and insightful. To our listeners, what was your favorite part? Please let us know in the comments or wherever you downloaded and listened to this. And while you're at it, would you give us a 5-star review? These are so valuable to us. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing, feel free to email me, Mark, at impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.